The Irish Nation, welcome to the show. Notre Dame improves to 2-1 on the season with an absolute thrashing 66-7 dominating performance against in-state rival the Purdue Boilermakers. Mike, what a roller coaster we've been on in the last 8 days. I think we had our cathartic moment on the show a week ago. I think Marcus Freeman had his cathartic moment on the field along with the rest of the team, dismantling Purdue. How you doing? What's your instant reaction from the game?
This team is so hard to get a read on. We were talking about this right before we hit record. It's just so volatile. We always look at the advanced stats and SP plus. That's the main thing that we look at. There are a lot of other things we look at, but I feel like that's the one that we tend to anchor to. And I want to say after week one, we were I think around 10th or something like that. And then obviously after NIU, we dropped a lot. We dropped to I think like maybe 17 or 18, which in terms of SP plus, a drop like that is pretty significant. You have to have a really bad performance in 1 week to drop like that, which we did. And then this next week against Purdue, we looked one of the like if that was the only game that you saw, if that was the only game that you were aware of with Notre Dame, you would have anointed them a national title contender. And we certainly looked like that, I would say, for large chunks of the game. But that was enough to bring us back to number 10. So it's these swings week to week are pretty wild. It's and that's one thing that the advanced metrics don't always capture. They kind of tend to give you a number that's more of an average. And our average right now is actually okay. It's actually pretty good for the advanced metrics, but does not capture all the volatility. And this is something that we called out at the beginning of the season. It's that Marcus Freeman's teams, we tend to show up really big in certain moments and we can look like a really strong team, a contender. But then we have these lapses that are just inexplicable and hard to explain. And I think going into this game, the question was NIU, is this an anomaly? Is it another one of these letdown performances? Or is maybe our team actually just not that good? Well, as we saw against Purdue, this is one of the biggest blowouts we've ever had. I think this might actually be Purdue's worst loss that they've ever had, just in terms of scoring margin. And that suggests that it was in fact an anomaly, which one makes things it's good in the sense that our team is actually probably a good team, right? We have the potential to be really good, but also just makes it very frustrating because we just had a huge opportunity that we totally choked on last week. And it's just head scratching how we could perform down to that level. But I'm going to keep a positive spin. I think I'm overall very happy that the scenarios that our team actually has a lot of potential in them. And it was more just a letdown performance as opposed to our team actually just sucks and we're just going to probably lose a bunch of games.
Yeah, the word I wrote down for this one was just pure joy. Like winning 66-7. I don't care who you're playing. Like football's a weird sport. This was a historic blowout. It was a historic game. The entire second half was statistically deemed garbage time in all of the advanced metrics just because the game was so out of hand, 42 nothing, and really pretty quickly in the third quarter there, 49 nothing. So for all of the pain and frustration of NIU, you've got to be able to step back and enjoy weekends like this as a Notre Dame fan and take them in stride and hopefully find some solace in it. But definitely a roller coaster to start. So we've got fun show today. We're going to break down this Purdue game, look ahead to Miami of Ohio next week. I will be there in person for that one with my family and some other friends, my family, to use the Brian Kelly. So excited for, man, I should have had that one queued up. I
Yeah,
got this.
I was a little disappointed that I didn't immediately see you press down a button and then hear that soundbite.
I'll go to Miami of Ohio
I'm
with.
here with my family.
There you
Got
go.
it.
All right, I got it back. I'm getting used to the soundboard. So we'll cover that game, and then Purdue was one of only 3 true road games for Notre Dame this year. Pretty interesting schedule with Navy, Army, and Georgia Tech. Technically neutral siters, although all much closer to the opponent than they are to South Bend, Indiana. So we're gonna go through some of our kind of favorite road environments and experiences. I have on a game day shirt from the Hurricane game at NC State. Definitely not in the bucket of favorite ones, but I went back into the depths of the closet and pulled this one out from the sloppy Hurricane game at NC State to celebrate a road win, commemorating that, I guess, road loss. But we'll dive into that as our third segment at the end. So, Mike, let's get right into this Purdue game. Let's start with the defense. As dominating as this game was on the offense, I think the story of this game begins and ends with the defense. What one stat really jumps out to you that really tells the story?
For me, it was the havoc, and this is something I called out in prior weeks. I think NIU, not the defense's best performance, but certainly not the reason we lost. But one area that they really did not do well in was generating havoc. And it was the same thing with Texas A&M. And my opinion was, in order for this defense to take a step to the next level, they would need to start generating a lot of havoc. And they must have heard us, because they did that in spades. The stat here, this is the most eye-popping havoc statistic I think I've ever seen from our defense. 50% havoc rate. I'm actually not even sure that that's right. We looked into it. Maybe there's different ways that you can measure it. Regardless, we had 4 sacks, 5 tackles for loss, 2 interceptions, 1 was returned for a touchdown. I think no matter any way that you cut the data, the havoc impact plays that we generated on defense were phenomenal. And as you mentioned, Brett, the entire second half was garbage time because we were just so dominant in that first half. So for me, this actually makes me feel really good about our defense moving forward too. Because as I mentioned, I wasn't concerned about the defense, but I definitely thought if they were to become ideally that top 5, top 3 defense that we were looking for, this was the area that they would need to start showing up, and they did exactly that in this game.
Yeah, I had a hard time coming up with one stat. I wrote down a few. I'll say them really quickly. In the first half before garbage time, Purdue only had a 17% success rate. So that measures a team's ability to stay on schedule, pick up 5 yards or more on first down, 70% of the yards to gain on second down, and convert on third down. They had a 17% success rate. They were 1 for 12 on third down. I thought that was pretty stunning. We outgained them yardage wise, 580 to 162. Now I know the 580 goes to the offense. Like that's just a barnstorming performance, but 162 yards. And when the score was 49-0, Purdue only had 69 yards of offense. So like before we brought in our third stringers, I mean, they just had nothing. Just a dominating performance by the defense. Mike, maybe one of the harder questions, and we'll ask this on offense too, and I actually struggled coming up with an answer. Who would you call out as like the top contributor? Like so many guys made an impact in this game on offense and defense. So many guys got involved. Who stood out to you as someone that you'd kind of call out as like, wow, that was setting the tone of the game?
Well, I mean, I think you said it. I think the theme for the defense was everybody was contributing, which I think that's the best case scenario for a defense. But if I really have to pick someone, I was really honing in on Botelho. Now, I don't know if he was the best performer on the defense, but he was playing exceptionally well until he got hurt. So he had generated a tackle for loss, a sack, was generating, as I mentioned, a ton of pressure, really standing out as an impact player. The broadcast team kept calling him out as coming off the edge and generating pressure on the QB. So I think Botelho is someone that we thought could take a big step this year, really emerge as an impact player. And it seemed like that's what we were seeing. So it's just such a shame that he had this injury. I feel so bad for him. He was carted off. We haven't heard anything yet on his injury, but I would say the manner in which he was carted off seemed to imply some sort of season-ending injury. So I feel terrible for him. He had matured a lot over the course of his time at Notre Dame. And Brett, we were going to do a review of that Notre Dame documentary series, but we've kind of pushed that back. We'll do it later at some point. But there was one moment in one of the episodes. It was when they picked the team captain. So when they were doing that sequence, Coach Freeman asked players who wanted to be a captain to step forward. Botelho, so he wasn't voted a captain, but he actually was someone who stepped forward to be considered to be a captain. So to me, like he didn't get it, but the fact that he even stood up and wanted that and was willing to put himself out there, to me, that showed a lot of growth and maturity. It showed that he's someone who felt that he had matured a lot, had grown a lot, could take on that responsibility if he wanted. So, yeah, I mean, again, I feel terrible for him, but he was playing extremely well before he got hurt.
Completely agree. I really struggled with this one. I mean, no one had more than 3 tackles in this game. That's how many different guys got on the full field on defense. 9 different guys had a QB pressure. Like that's just astonishing of how much of a dominating team performance this was. I just like doing the Ben Morrison tracker because he's just my favorite player on the team. He honestly had a pretty pitiful game by Ben Morrison standards. He allowed 1 catch for 18 yards. So we're 3 games in. He's been targeted 13 times. He's given up just 72 yards on 7 catches. So our number 1 corner is on track to allow about 250 to 300 yards in a season for the opposing team's number 1 wide receiver. Like that's just fun when it's another game and like their best receiver goes out there and the best they can muster is an 18-yard catch against our starting corner. Nothing else allowed by Morrison. So I'm just going to keep shouting him out every week. Let's switch to the offense. By the way, my last note on defense, we are still on track for Brett's hot take of the year that Notre Dame will not allow 20 points in a single game. 3 for 3 so far. Going to the offense, it's wild that we actually had 2 3-and-outs in the first half. I was actually surprised going back and looking at that. The other 5 drives all went for 60 plus yards and ended in touchdowns, no field goal attempts until really game was, pretty clearly out of hand. So crazy efficient. Same same question I'll ask on the other side, Mike. What's the one stat that really stood out to you as kind of putting into context just how dominating the Notre Dame offense was?
364 rushing yards with an average of 8.6 yards per carry. No matter what, if a defense is giving up that, there is absolutely no way that they're going to be able to win. We were just bullying them, and it was every single part of the ground game. So Jeremiah Love, I feel so lucky that we have a back like this. I remember when we recruited him, I think he was around a top 50 recruit. The Notre Dame media, the beat reporters, they were saying, all right, like this is good. Notre Dame's had some good backs, but we really haven't had many of these top tier recruits. Let's see if this guy pans out. And we're seeing that. This guy has an elite physical skill set, and he's really getting it done. He had 109 yards, over 10 yards per carry with a touchdown. And he had some carries that he just made it look easy. You could just see how explosive he was, how strong he was. And it wasn't even just Jeremiah Love. Riley Leonard, he was absolutely destroying Purdue on the run. He had 100 yards too, 3 touchdowns. So he found the end zone quite a bit. And then even Jadarian Price, he didn't have 100 yards. I think he hit somewhere in the 80s, but he was also averaging over 10 yards per carry. And then I forgot to mention Riley Leonard was also averaging over 9 yards per carry. So really this game was a 3-headed monster in terms of our run game. And every aspect of the run game was impressive. When I looked at the line yards, 4.4. So that shows that our offensive line was getting some push. And but then not even just that, our yards after contact were 6.9. So basically we were getting push, and then our running backs were running through that, and then they were extremely effective in open space. So just really just doing whatever we wanted on the ground against Purdue.
Yeah, I actually went a slightly different direction. I couldn't agree more. The one thing I'd lay on to what you just said was 6.9 yards after contact. For context, we were like one of the best teams in the country a year ago when we averaged nearly 4 yards per carry after contact. Average is about 3. So all in, college football rushes average about 5 yards per carry, and that's roughly 2 yards before contact, 3 yards after contact. So looking for kind of 2 yards of push from your offensive line and 3 yards of push from the running back, just getting further upfield from that first point of contact. We were averaging 7 yards after contact in this game and are pretty much right on track to where we were a year ago. That, if we can maintain that over the course of the year, you'd think you'd maybe have a little bit of drop off from a physical running back like Audric Estime. Not at all. I mean, Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price just churning out yards after contact. The one I wrote down, there's a bunch. We could talk like 55% success rate, 7 for 12 on third down, like just a ton of great stats in this game. The one I wrote down was 8 plays of 20 yards or more. 4 of those went for touchdowns of at least 28 yards. We're now 4th in the country in explosiveness. That does not sound like Notre Dame football. Like explosive, high-powered offense doesn't sound like Notre Dame football. We are doing our damage with chunk plays. Even if you go back to the Texas A&M game, it was the 34-yard run. The 47-yard run by Jadarian Price and the 21-yard run by Jeremiah Love. Like, this isn't us marching down the field and executing the red zone. Those are chunk touchdowns. Against NIU, our second offensive touchdown, or only one after the first drive, was the 34-yard hurdling touchdown by Jeremiah Love. And then in this game, again, 4 big chunk touchdowns, 8 chunk plays overall of 20 plus yards, putting us 4th in the nation in explosiveness. That's fun football. And I liked complementing that with having all of those long scoring drives I talked about, 5 drives of 60 plus yards or more. So we were demonstrating in this game, yes, that explosiveness is still there, but there was a real rhythm to the offense. There was a lot more, like we weren't getting stuck in third and long. We weren't getting stuck in second and long, but still had that explosiveness. I thought that was great. Mike, going to jump into the meat of our text threads this weekend, which you and I weren't aligned on. In fact, I think we kind of had a split vote in our text thread with our buddies. Evaluate Riley Leonard, and you and I had different takes on this. Like, give some context of whether or not you think he should be starting quarterback going forward, or whether or not we should, be giving Steve Angeli more of a look.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely split. That's currently where I'm at. So if I look at Riley Leonard in this game, he actually overall he played well. So he graded out well. Pro Football Focus, they gave him a grade of 76.5. That is a good grade. It's not quite elite, but that is a very good grade for an offensive player. But it's essentially just because of his rushing attempts. So look, while he certainly did better than last week as a passer, and I think even for Riley Leonard, he has not demonstrated a really strong ability as a passer yet. But I think last week was definitely an anomaly even for him. He turned the ball over twice, and Riley Leonard historically has not been someone who's thrown a lot of picks. He did last week. He didn't this week. I think that's probably more in line with what we typically see with him. But I wouldn't say that he definitely did not grade out well as a passer in this game. So Pro Football Focus grade, sticking with that source, they gave him a 62.7 grade as a passer. So it's a little bit above a replacement level. So he basically was not hurting us in the passing game. We were maybe getting a little bit of net benefit, but he still really struggled under pressure. 54.5, that's below replacement level. So anytime he was getting pressured, he was really struggling. And I think one other point that we have to keep in mind here is that with this passing grade is Pro Football Focus grade, they do not adjust for their opponent. And we called out Purdue's secondary as potentially one of the weakest in the country. So this was not exactly a really tough passing defense battle for him. And we still didn't see, his inability to stretch the field or even hit intermediate, nonetheless deep passes. So I think that's one thing that I'm still really, really concerned about. And I'm going to jump into his passing stats a little bit more here. So he's 11 for 16, 112 yards, which is fine. I mean, look, that's like a decent completion percentage. No turnovers, as I mentioned, and I think that's actually really important. So basically, not actively hurting the team, but we were pretty much using him for low impact plays to kind of keep the defense honest, right? They couldn't just like totally focus on the run game, but definitely not an overly impactful area of our offense. The passing game wasn't. So only 7 yards per attempt. Again, he has 0 passing touchdowns through 3 games. And I think that's really like a big headline there. And a lot of that's just the average depth of throw. So when he throws the ball, the average target that he's aiming for is 5 yards down the field. So you're not going to be able to generate a whole lot of explosive, effective passing game through that. So, and in this game, only did not complete a single pass with a depth beyond 10 yards. So he's really just hitting these easy throws. And in particular, I think what stood out to me was that there were just some very notable misses. So the one that everyone on social media kept calling out was he scrambled for a first down, which was quite a good scramble actually, and it got us the first down, which was important. But then if you pause the screen when he was rolling out to his right, you saw Jeremiah Love just like wide open essentially in the end zone. It was right in his line of sight, and he just didn't see him at all. So I think there were just a few more things like this where it just seems like he wasn't seeing opportunities for big gains. He was missing open receivers. Even one of his better completions was it was more Jaden Thomas made a nice catch on an awkward throw and was able to pull some yards out of it. So I just wasn't like particularly impressed with his passing game again. So, but where he was effective, as I mentioned, was the running game. So we mentioned his stats above. He was really just annihilating Purdue with his running attempts. But I think one reason I'm split is that while his running was very effective, and I think in this game, it definitely more than made up for his very average passing game. I just wonder if it's scalable against a better defense. And when I watch some of these Riley Leonard runs back again, some of these yards were definitely coming from pretty poor defense by Purdue. There were definitely missed tackles. And then even when I looked at his Pro Football Focus grade for his running grade, it was good, but it definitely was not like an elite grade. So I kind of wonder if this is going to work against better teams. Was he really as effective as it seemed like against Purdue? Or did Purdue make him look a little bit better on the run than he actually is? So I think that's one area where I'm getting a little concerned. Now moving to Angeli actually graded out extremely well, 85.1. So that is an elite grade. And one thing with Purdue, a lot of this came in garbage time, but Purdue actually left their starters in for a lot of the game. So Angeli wasn't necessarily doing this against like the fourth stringer. He was doing this against, for at least like many of his plays against what Purdue would consider like people in their two deep. So clearly a much better passer. His first throw was a touchdown on a play action, which I have to call out, and he clearly, I think he just clearly demonstrated a much better ability to handle the passing game. Much deeper average depth of target, 12.9. And then actually he graded out, like where he graded out the best was on deeper throws. So when Angeli came in, clearly the passing game took a step up that we weren't seeing, under Riley Leonard. So I think where I'm at right now is, does Riley Leonard's running make up for the average passing attack that he has? Are we better suited putting Angeli in and potentially waking up a passing game, but then sacrificing the running game? And Angeli can run a little bit. And I think one other thing with Angeli is that he definitely seemed to struggle a bit against pressure. He took some pretty bad sacks. Some of that stuff seemed correctable to me, though. It seemed like he was keeping his eyes downfield, trying to find a receiver. He just waited a little bit too long. And those, he could probably be coached to throw it away in that scenario. So overall, I'm definitely split. I don't know exactly what the answer is. I don't think Angeli is some elite quarterback just sitting on the sideline that we just put in is going to fix everything. So I certainly believe the passing game will be much better if he's in, but I'm not entirely sure whether or not that's going to make up for what we get from Riley Leonard on the run. So yeah, kind of a non-answer, but I think to me, I'm torn, and it's a bit of a toss up.
Yeah, you were definitely in the bucket of, I think not happy with the pass game in the first half and split decision, thinks there's a quarterback controversy. I thought the quarterback controversy ended on Saturday. And I thought Riley Leonard won the job so long as we are contending for a playoff spot, which we still are. If we lose another game or we lose a couple more games, okay. Open it up, think about the future. But I thought he was hyper efficient in this game. He completed 69% of his passes, and I thought he won the game with his legs, and less about what he did running the ball and more about what it opened up for the running backs. So on Jeremiah Love's 48-yard touchdown, Riley Leonard absolutely distracted the defense. Like the threat of him just marching up and down the field running the ball made a huge impact. It made the safety crash. It made the outside linebacker crash. And it completely set up Jeremiah Love being able to take it 48 yards to the house. And that's entirely not there if you don't have the running threat of a Riley Leonard. And it's not there if it's Steve Angeli. That play just doesn't happen. The dink and dunk stuff on passing, I completely agree. Like his average depth of throw in this game was 5 yards. Like we're just not either asking him to throw the ball deep. And again, in this game, like, I don't know, it was so clear we were dominating them. You probably don't show your whole playbook. We obviously took him out for the entire second half. He's only attempted 2 throws over 10 yards. Sorry, over 20 yards, only 4 on the season. So I still can't get a feel for, is Riley Leonard bad at throwing the ball down the field? Is he bad at, hey, we've got guys running deep routes and he's just not pulling the trigger? Are guys not getting open? Or is Mike Denbrock just not calling it? And I think there's a little bit of everything in there. Like Texas A&M is a bit of a random data point, or maybe not the most reliable data point because of how good A&M's defense was. Road game, new offensive line, new coordinator, new QB. Like it was very clear we were calling a conservative game. NIU, I mean, I just don't know what to think. Like that whole game was just a mess. And here, everything was just working so well. Like, I don't know. So I still don't know if we actually know whether or not Riley Leonard can throw the ball down the field. All we know is he's not even attempting it. Those are different factors to those are kind of two different things for me. But what I do know is his ability to run the ball is also opening up our run game in a massive way that I think now Denbrock's figured out. I thought it was interesting you brought up the fact that he forced missed tackles. Those are very repeatable things to do, particularly when he was forcing missed tackles against safeties. Their 2 starting safeties had 8 of Purdue's 15 missed tackles. Riley Leonard led the team with 6 forced missed tackles. So if he's getting to the second level, I'm very confident that defensive backs are going to have a hard time bringing down Riley Leonard, just given how big and physical he is as a runner. I actually do think that's sustainable. And I look ahead to our schedule, like other than Louisville, USC's defense isn't going to slow this offense down when it's operating like this. Like Florida State, like Georgia Tech, like maybe. But I do think this is a very repeatable, sustainable game plan. Um, and I think Riley Leonard won the job. Like if you go put up 42 points in the first half and your QB accounts for 3 touchdowns and over 200 yards and a half, I don't care how he gets there. That's winning the starting job. And I thought he put it to rest. And I'd be really surprised if you hear Freeman even like entertain the question about Steve Angeli based on that performance. I
Yeah.
also think it's important to note that Angeli's played with the backups in. I get Purdue still had a lot of starters in, but I mean, he's playing in a garbage time blowout, and he's played against Oregon State, who had dozens of players opt out of the bowl game, and like we're barely fielding players like enough to practice leading up to the bowl game with an entirely new coaching staff. Like, I don't think we actually have a good read on Steve Angeli either. We're getting a better read on Riley Leonard, and I think if you're in a playoff hunt, you go with your lead horse and you go with the guy that's doing it with his legs. I don't care how he's getting it done passing the ball. If we're putting up 42 points and a half with the first team in, I got my quarterback. So looking forward, Mike, how do you think about this game in context of NIU, this game in context of the path to the playoff, goals for the rest of the season? Like, how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the goal still has to be the playoff. I think what we saw against Purdue showed that the team has it in them, and we need to prove that NIU is an anomaly. I think Purdue was a big step towards showing that. But I think with Freeman's teams, the big thing is consistency week in, week out, and that's the area that we've really struggled in. So that's really what we got to see from here on out. And I think, look, I think if we went 10-2, that's not a bad result at all, right? I think that's okay, and like that, there's a scenario where we still make the playoff in that situation. But yeah, I think the goal definitely needs to be to win out here to show. If that happens, then I feel much more confident in Freeman's ability to kind of steer the program forward. And even if you have a big moment like this seems to take the program backwards, it seems like we're still seeing that progression that we want.
For sure. I mean, I think this all comes back to taking care of business. I don't think a 66-7 win atones for NIU. I saw a lot of kind of beat writers out there and, pundits, and I think fans saying like, all right, like we're back. This made up for NIU. This doesn't make up for NIU. Consistently going out there week in, week out, and going 11-1 and making the playoffs, that will atone for NIU. This is a fun game. This is awesome. Like, I'm in a great mood as a Notre Dame fan right now, but it doesn't atone for NIU unless if you go to the playoff. But if you end up going 10-2, that you're sitting there staring at like NIU is the reason why I'm not in a playoffs position. We have a 90+% chance of winning every remaining game except for Louisville, 70% chance, Georgia Tech, 82% chance, and USC, a toss-up, about a 51% chance. So you got to go win the easy ones. That starts next week with Miami of Ohio. So transition into that, led by Chuck Martin. I can't believe he's been there a decade. He joined Miami of Ohio as their head coach 10 years ago in 2014. He's a 2-time national champion as the head coach of Grand Valley State after the Brian Kelly era. He's a longtime Brian Kelly disciple. He was our offensive coordinator and an assistant coach in the early years of Brian Kelly, including our run to the national title. So he knows Notre Dame very, very well. We know him very well. And he's basically gotten Miami of Ohio to be a 500 team. They've made a bowl game in 4 straight years, excluding COVID. And then last year was a really big breakout year, 11-3. They win the MAC, a ton of hype coming into this year. As the reigning conference champs and expectations to repeat, and a disappointing start. They lost 13-6 to Northwestern, 27-16 to Cincinnati, 2 Power 4 conference teams that are in rebuilding mode and really felt like Miami of Ohio would have a chance to knock off one or both of those teams before coming into this Notre Dame game. So a bit down from their expectations, although I think played both of those teams tough, still right in line to go and, be competitive in the MAC. And of course, we all know Notre Dame just lost to Northern Illinois from that same conference. So, Mike, with that is kind of the overarching, where are they at 0-2 coming into this game? But I think a competitive football team. Walk us through your thoughts on the offense and what we should be looking for.
I think the player you got to focus on is Britt Gabbert. So got hurt midway through last year, but and I would say so far this year, some solid stats, threw for 230 yards against Northwestern, 339 against Cincinnati, but he's thrown 3 interceptions. So he hasn't shown an ability to take care of the ball as much as you would like. And in particular, there've been a lot of struggles in the red zone. So only 2 offensive touchdowns through the first 2 games. So a lot of limitations here that you're seeing. And I think also some of this ties back into the receiver core. So they actually lost their best wide receiver from last year to South Carolina in the portal. Gained a gadget guy, Cade McDonald, transfer, and then a tight end from Florida State. Cade McDonald so far has been their main person, though. 16 catches, 240 yards through 2 games. So that's a pretty good, I would say that's actually a pretty good stat line, but it's pretty much all him at this point. And then in terms of their running back room, they have Rashad Amos. So he rushed for over 1,000 yards and 13 touchdowns last year. That was their main guy, but then he transferred to Ole Miss. So this year it's been running back by committee. Their leading rusher is just 33 yards against Northwestern and then 14 against Cincy. So not an impact person there. Doesn't seem like that's an aspect of their offense that you have to be too worried about. And I think this is an example. We talk a lot about the implications of the transfer portal. I think this is an example where you lose your best player going out the door, and then they get replaced by a backup, even if it's from a Power 4 school. It's not really depth that you need, right? It's the type of dynamic in the transfer portal that hurts a lot of these types of teams, like teams in the MAC, teams that are weaker Power 4 teams. So this is a scenario where it seemed to work against them. And then finally, moving to their offensive line, they have 2 strong offensive tackles, but the interior is a bit more questionable. And I think we're also seeing that reflect in the run game. So, Brett, I think kind of taking scope of their entire offense, what do you think of this matchup for Notre Dame? Do you think it's favorable?
Yeah, I just think hearing them struggle in one dimension against Northwestern and Cincinnati, where I think it's pretty clear we would be a superior defense to those 2 schools. I just think if you've got a one-dimensional offense, Al Golden's going to figure out a way to beat you. If you have one go-to wide receiver, Cade McDonald, I know it sounds a little bit more like a slot receiver, gadget guy, came up as their punt returner. So I actually don't know if Ben Morrison will draw the task of guarding him, but anyone in our secondary right now, I think, is playing with a ton of confidence. And really, I think the strength of maybe the entire Notre Dame team is just our ability to shut down opposing passing games. Really, other than that one NIU touchdown that's just going to annoy me for the rest of the year, we've yet to give up anything in a meaningful moment. And so I just think a one-dimensional offense puts you in a really bad place. They are 100th in success rate. They are 105th in havoc allowed. So this is a situation where really until this Purdue game, we're outside the top 100 in havoc generated. I think it's another game in a row that sets up well for Al Golden to say, got it. You don't have much of a run game? Cool. I'm coming after your quarterback. And I think that's a really exciting matchup for us to look forward to. On defense, turning over there, again, they only allowed 13 points against Northwestern. Even against Cincy, one of those touchdown drives was a 3-yard drive after a Miami of Ohio fumble. So really only 20 points allowed in that game by the defense. Did a pretty good job in the red zone in both of those games, holding the field goals, not touchdowns. They forced 3 turnovers through 2 games. So we said coming in, this is a top 50 defense, according to SP+. They're living up to that billing. This is a pretty darn solid defense. Actually, one of the better ones that Notre Dame will face this year. Obviously, Texas A&M, I think, is by far the best defense we play this year. I think Louisville's up there. I think Florida State should be up there, although it's been really leaky to start off their 0-3 campaign in Tallahassee. More on that come November. But I think this is probably the 3rd or 4th best defense that Notre Dame will see this year. From a personnel perspective, it's really in their front 7. Brian Ugwu is their all-star end. Apologies if I got that name wrong. He had over 100 tackles, 13 sacks a year ago. They've got 2 LBs that are both preseason All-MAC. And by and large, the scouting report is they're pretty good defensive tackles, but they're considered undersized. They're considered good players at the MAC level, but both are kind of lacking that 300 to 330 pound frame to really kind of hold the middle of a defense. And then by and large, their secondary was kind of the big question mark coming into the year. And I don't know if we have a good feel for it yet. They both played against two kind of work in progress new starting QBs at Cincy and Northwestern. Neither of those QBs are expected to really kind of light it up. So they largely held passing game in check. Hard to know, does that translate in this game? Although, of course, I would also describe Notre Dame's passing game as a work in progress, as we've debated. And then in the advanced stats, they are seventh in explosiveness allowed. So they do a really good job limiting the big plays. Their MO this year has been keep it in front of you, bend, don't break, get them in the red zone, force field goals. And so they're 110th in success rate allowed. So other teams have been able to move the ball, keep the chains moving, but they just don't allow that big play. I think that's probably the most interesting matchup here. Notre Dame, as I mentioned, is fourth in explosiveness going up against this Miami of Ohio defense. I think the big question in this game is, can Miami of Ohio prevent that big play Notre Dame offense from showing up? Can they keep Jeremiah Love to 10-yard runs, not 30-yard runs? Can they prevent that breakout big hit moment for Notre Dame that's really been the key to our success throughout this year? So, Mike, what are your thoughts kind of hearing that overview of their personnel and the stats as you think about this matchup?
Yeah, I think the explosiveness dynamic's pretty interesting here. I would tend to think, like, given that a lot of our explosive plays have been coming in the ground game on the run, and that's an area where they seem weaker, I tend to think that we're going to be able to kind of push them a little bit here and generate more explosiveness in the ground game and as a whole than they've given up. So, look, I think this is another matchup where there's just also a huge talent mismatch, right? I think our players, again, this is going to sound very familiar to when we were talking about NIU, but we just have more elite athletes. We have way more 4-star players. We just have way more talent on paper. This is a game where if we show up and we take the game seriously, we should not have a whole lot of difficulty taking care of Miami of Ohio. So, and I think that's reflected in a lot of the data that we're seeing. So 97% win expectancy. I want to say NIU was something like that. 27-point favorites. That's very close to what NIU suggested. The over and under here is 44.5. So that implies about 36-9 in the implied score. SP Plus, a little bit more favorable. It says that we're 33-point favorites. I tend to agree, but I don't know that we're necessarily going to see the same level of passion, the same level of fanaticism that we saw against Purdue. So I think we still win this one handily. I think we win 35-10, but I don't think we are. I don't think we're winning by 60 points in this game. I think it's a comfortable win, but not again, not as tremendous a performance as we saw in the prior week.
Yeah, I've got SP Plus putting this one at more of a 33-point favorite. I think a lot of times Vegas, when you get those big blowouts, will tend to bring the line down, just thinking there's going to be garbage time. Teams are going to be running out the clock. Like, both teams aren't going to be playing full go for the full 60 minutes, and that kind of regresses to the mean. But I'm going to trust SP Plus on this one. I've got Notre Dame winning this one pretty big, 41-6. And I've really got that less about Miami of Ohio's defense giving up 41 points. I've got it more as they're just going to wear down. And I really think this is a great matchup for Al Golden to just absolutely thwart this Miami of Ohio offense when they're that one-dimensional. And then I think over time, the more physical team running the game, like, I just expect us to be able to just move up and down. And I get it, Miami of Ohio might be successful on defense in the red zone against Northwestern and Cincinnati. I just think we have so many different ways to get the ball in the end zone with the dual threat quarterback option, where we've been pretty darn efficient this year. I like Notre Dame's chances to keep it going with another blowout win. So I'm a little more bullish on this one. I'm also going to be there in person. Really excited to see this first game with my nieces and nephews, which is a really exciting moment for me. So Uncle Brett going out on a limb and taking a big one here for the Irish. Let's go to our third segment. I'm really excited about this one. It brings back a lot of really fun Notre Dame memories for me. We sat and made a list of all of the road games or neutral site games that Mike and I have gone to. I'm going to go ahead and say I ran up the score on you on this one a little bit. I've been to 19 different venues to watch a Notre Dame game, 18, excluding Notre Dame Stadium, to your 8, 18 to 8. So I've got you beat here.
18 excluding Notre Dame, right? Is that
18
what you're saying?
excluding Notre Dame.
Okay, yeah, that's right. Yeah, 18 to 8. Yeah, I got to pick it up. I got to
Exactly.
Yeah,
I've dedicated a lot of paid time off over the years to go into Notre Dame football games. So look, it's an interesting schedule for Notre Dame, getting to play in a baseball stadium, Yankee Stadium at Army, 2 NFL stadiums, Navy at MetLife, and Georgia Tech here in Atlanta, my home, or I guess now hometown, at Mercedes-Benz where the Falcons play. None of those are really neutral site games, right? I mean, Mercedes-Benz is a mile away from Georgia Tech's campus. Army's in New York. Navy's in that same area with those 2 New York games, but technically neutral siters. And then only 3 true road games. We've now gotten 2 of them out of the way. The only one left is USC. So, Mike, we wanted to go down memory lane. Let's start with the positives. What are your top, call it 1 to 3 experiences on the road?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the one that stands at the top is going to Georgia, UGA in Athens. Brett, you were there. Brett, actually, I stayed at his place when I was visiting. Brett organized a tailgate bus that picked us up in Atlanta early in the morning, drove us to Athens. And actually, there was a little bit of drama. I remember the bus. It seemed like we were having trouble getting in touch with them. They didn't show up that late, but it was enough to where we were like starting to get a little stressed. But then they actually showed up, and we got there with plenty of time, and it was totally okay. But yeah, I mean, I think that was the first, and I'm from SEC country, but I hadn't actually been to a true big time SEC matchup at an SEC stadium. So for me, this was a very interesting experience. It's something that I was really looking forward to, because you can see the energy on TV. That's one thing, but it really is another thing altogether to be there. And it was an electric atmosphere. They had this light show, fourth quarter light show, and this was, I think, the Notre Dame administration saw that light show in Athens, and then their takeaway was like, "Oh wow, that was so cool. We have to do that at Notre Dame Stadium." And then that's exactly what they did. But it was just, the entire stadium was packed with fans screaming the entire time. A lot of Georgia's traditions were great. The tailgating, it was a little hot, but the tailgating was fantastic. And I think for me, one thing, I mean, this was cool for everybody, but me and Jim, a buddy of ours that we mentioned on the show a lot, we went to Atlanta, we went to Athens, and we actually didn't have a ticket at the time. I think we were thinking, all right, we'll just figure it out. But on that tailgate bus, we met an older Notre Dame alum, and we hit it off with him. And then, needless to say, he was like, "Oh, guess what? I actually have a couple extra tickets. I'll sell them to you guys for face value." And mine was on like the 25-yard line. It was like 3 rows back. This is like a ticket that it was probably going for like $2,000 or something like that. I think I paid like $200 for it. So that was incredible. That could not have worked out any better. And then this same guy, when we were tailgating, he told us that he knew Tim Brown. He's like, "Oh yeah, Tim Brown's tailgating somewhere around him. I'll give him a call and see if he can come by." We didn't think he was going to come through. And then a half hour later, I look up, and sure enough, Tim Brown's walking by, and then we all get a picture with him. So I think just the entire atmosphere there was very hard to beat. Obviously, we lost. It was a close game. We had an opportunity to win, so that dings it a little bit. But for me, that was an incredible experience. Everyone there was very friendly, polite. I guess some frat boys on the way out were barking at me when I was walking back to the
to be
the bus.
expected.
But yeah, I mean, for me, that was number one.
By the way, Tim Brown signed our parking pass that I had for that tailgate. So I got Tim Brown. I didn't have anything else for him to sign, so I got Tim Brown's autograph on a red Georgia parking pass.
Yeah, so that was number one for me. And then the second one, it's interesting that my top 2 are losses, but my second one is the BCS national title. And this might seem like kind of weird to pick a loss, but I really need to just rewind to the frame of mind that I was in back in that week leading up. And that's really what I'm picking here, is that week in Miami leading up to this. So at that moment in time, I remember thinking how lucky I was to be a student when it seemed like Notre Dame football was having their big renaissance. It was just the most magical season you could possibly imagine. We had the goal line stand at Stanford. We had, I think it was Pitt or Purdue. It was Pitt, right? We had the extra person on the field.
Yeah.
And they missed the field goal, but they didn't call the penalty. So there were just so many things like that were happening. It just seemed like the team of destiny. And then you could feel that energy from everybody who was there. It felt like the entire student body was just converging on Miami. We were hanging out at the beach. We were going to different cool spots in Miami. It was just, I feel like it's one of the most fun weeks I had in my entire life. up to that point. And yeah, I mean, of course, what ended up happening is everything came crashing to reality, right? The game was terrible, but everything up until that point, I
Great
mean, the whole
tailgate.
the tailgate was great. Like we showed up in droves. That entire week it was so much fun. The energy was so great that it still outweighs anything that happened in the game. And it's just when I think of like a quintessential like top college experience, like for me, that's always at the top of the list.
So for me, the reason why I actually thought of proposing this segment was reminiscing about Purdue. So senior year, I went to every game home and away, which involved a road game at Purdue. And they have one of my all-time favorite, and I also think sneaky under the radar college football traditions where all of their like top college bars were like just, the equivalent of our Finneys or our linebacker all open up at 5 a.m. on game days because they've also just had so many, noon, 11 a.m. kickoffs over the years in the Big Ten. So they open up at 5 a.m. and you can only get in if you're wearing a costume. And if you get there at 7 a.m., the line is like out the door and good luck. Like you're just not getting in. And so we drove down Friday night. I went to bed relatively early. My wife, girlfriend at the time, Ann, did not go to bed early and also just stayed out to the bars and still just basically met me at the other bars at 5 in the morning. And I just remember showing up like we're dressed up in costumes like it's Halloween, but it's not. And we like go to this bar and it was afternoon game, night game, but it wasn't a noon game.
Yeah.
It was late afternoon.
Yeah. I think that's
Yeah,
right.
because you were there as well, but
Oh,
not with
okay.
us.
So that reminds me, I forgot to list Purdue on my list. Not that that closes the gap, but I got one more. So
18-9, got it. Purdue's
yeah,
on the list.
I'm at 9. So yeah, but and Brent and I were talking about this. He was like, "Did you do the Breakfast Club?" I was like, I was like, "I don't know. Can you explain it to me?" And then he basically gave me this explanation. I was like, "I definitely did not go to that because there was a 0% chance that I would not recall that if I did it."
I will say you really have to reflect on your life choices, though, when you walk out of a bar that had like no windows, dark bar, you're there for 5 hours, and you walk out and you're just expecting it to be like dark out because you're just
Yeah.
like your body's telling you, oh, it must be 1 a.m. I'm leaving a bar after 5 hours. And you walk outside and it's like bright, crisp, sunny. There's like children and parents walking with baby strollers to a park. And you're just like, oh my God, I am in a different world. Like we went and got Subway. Like we went and just completely like, oh my God, like we have a game in 5 hours. And we've just like been doing this. So I
Yeah.
think that's a really cool college tradition, though, that I don't think gets enough enough attention for what they do in West Lafayette, getting ready for game day.
Yeah, it sounds like reality just hit you as soon as you walked out of the bar. I mean, at least the good thing is you still had like a full day of tailgating and the game to look forward to, as opposed to, I don't know, people who stay out till like 6 in the morning and they're like, oh my God, it's okay. It's time to go home now.
Exactly. My other one, very different experience, but that same year, senior year, went out to Air Force. My high school buddy Tony was in the Air Force Academy, and so we went out there over fall break with a couple friends, and I thought that was one of the just coolest game day traditions, where the stadium is nestled right into the base of the Rocky Mountains. The sun sets over the Rockies that like everyone can see from the stadium. And then before the game, they do a traditional flyover, but the stadium announcer narrates what the pilot is doing and what the symbolic, maneuvers are, or why are they letting out smoke, or why are they doing this turn, or why are they doing that, what it all represents. And it ends with the plane flying over the Rockies into the western sunset, and then disappears, like just goes completely out of sight over the Rockies, which is, and what's symbolic of flying westward at the end of a flight pattern is for all of the soldiers left behind. And they're doing it in a B-52 bomber that was like flown by an ace, I think in Vietnam or maybe Korea. Like you just get chills in that environment. And it's such a great way to get amped up for a football game, but it's also just such a great way to remember there's some much, much bigger things going on than just
Yeah.
this football game in front of us. And it's such a unified stadium. Like, doesn't matter if you're cheering for Notre Dame or the Air Force, like we're all on the same team. And it was just I'm getting shivers saying it. It like every time I think about it, the coolest football environment I've ever been in, having absolutely nothing to do with, the game itself. And I'll just like never forget that moment in that stadium.
Yeah, you're doing a good job selling it. I feel like just based on that explanation, I'm like, what the heck am I doing? How have I never been to a game at this place?
Yeah, it's honestly like whether or not your team's playing there or not, and it's right on, like it's not on the Air Force like base, but like very very close to the academy, and I always think that's cool. And stadiums are like very integrated into the campus or very
Yeah.
integrated into the culture. Mike, I'll let you take this one. We were both at I think both Soldier Field games, Miami of
Yes.
Ohio and
Yeah, we were.
Wisconsin. I saw you had that one on your list, so I'll let you take that one. But both of those were awesome experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I just think in terms of neutral site locations. I mean, Chicago just feels like Notre Dame's backyard. So obviously it's Big Ten country. So when we played Wisconsin, there were a ton of Wisconsin fans there as well. But it really just felt like I didn't feel, I would say, just in terms of me bumping into people that I knew, it felt pretty similar to what would typically happen when I was back on Notre Dame's campus. And because we just, both of us being Notre Dame grads, we know so many people who live in Chicago. So it was a great opportunity to just catch up with a lot of people. For the Miami game in 2012, that was just a blowout performance that helped kind of, it was like an early sign that we had something special that season. And we stayed at one of my buddy Jack, we stayed at his parents' house, which was awesome. I remember they helped supply some like really great tailgating food. The interesting thing is like the tailgating for both of these games was, I thought really good. So obviously for the Miami game, we had a little bit more time. I think it was an afternoon game or maybe it was a primetime
It's
game.
a night game.
It was a night game, yeah. So we had
Yeah,
all day
Miami
to
was a
tailgate.
night. Yeah.
And then the Soldier Field parking garages actually were a really cool venue. Like I just remember they were packed with tons of Notre Dame fans. People were just like, yeah, it was just again like one of those kind of like electric atmosphere.
I got to cut you off. As a Packers fan and a Notre Dame fan, tailgating in parking garages sounds terrible. And so I just cannot, I cannot let this point go. I think tailgating at Soldier Field sucks. Tailgating with my friends,
You're obliged.
I can have a blast wherever I'm tailgating with my friends, but I really, really have to, like make do with the Soldier Field parking garages. But
Yeah. Well, hey, okay, maybe it was so fun because it was so fun because the Bears fans weren't there, right? If the Bears
there
fans
you go.
weren't
The
there,
Bears fans
that's the
weren't
spin.
there.
We
All
had
right.
non-Bears fans were there. That's why the tailgating was so good. But yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, Brett, you're obliged to say that as a Packers fan. Growing up in Memphis, people would have parties in parking garages all the time. That was kind of a thing there. I swear to God, I'm not making this up. It's actually a thing. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it's just, and then you get to explore the city. Chicago is a really fun city. Brett, you live there. I never lived there, but I've been there a million times. And then both these games, there were big blowouts. The Wisconsin game was close for a lot of it, but then it was like in the last quarter or so, we just completely ran away with it. And that was a big noon kickoff. So we didn't get to tailgate as much for that one. But, I think, Brett, we could both confirm that we certainly got our fair share of Malort leading up to the game.
For sure. For Malort definitely sponsored that tailgate. The next one I wrote down that I just have a lot of fun talking about was Dublin, the trip my wife and I went on last year. Just an incredible environment. It was the most Americans to ever travel abroad for a single sporting event. So not like the Olympics or the World Cup where it's like multiple sporting events or like a tennis tournament, but for like a single game. And just such a like happy ruckus environment. Again, like we were playing Navy, so everyone was like very friendly with each other. And the stadium is just like so cool. Like just the design of it is very unlike, a pitch you would see in America. And so awesome environment. I thought they did a great job, like for fans, making it easy to get to. And the stadium, you're just kind of like, you're walking by it almost felt a little bit like Green Bay, where you're just walking by like all of these like kind of neighborhood houses and it just kicks out and you're at a stadium and you walk in, you go to the game, you come back and you walk out and you kind of walk a mile away and you're just right back at the bar scene. And so I thought Temple Bar and that whole downtown area and the way they tied in Notre Dame and our Irish traditions and Guinness, that was a really, really cool trip. I think if you're any fan out there and you get a chance to go to a game over in Dublin, awesome, awesome country and to go tour just more broadly into a vacation. My last one, I'll do two in a row here. My last one was the UVA game in 2015. Had great tickets from a really good family friend of mine that we went with. Shout out to my other friend, Mike. And that was the game where Malik Zaire broke his ankle, and it was like right in front of us. Like we just saw it and we're like, damn. And Deshaun Kaiser comes in. We blow a 2-score lead in the fourth quarter. And there's obviously the very famous play that I'm going to get to at the end. But it's crazy how I think this is one of the best plays and like just like experiences I've ever seen outside of Notre Dame Stadium. Like the, Manti Te'o, stand against Stanford, or any of the Michigan or USC wins, or when we blew out Clemson. Like I think all of my top like football moments have almost always been at Notre Dame Stadium. And we've talked about it. So many of these road games, the BCS National Championship game. Last year I went to Clemson on the road. You've mentioned, you know, um, um, Ohio State on the road, and Georgia on the road. Like they've never gone our way in the big moment.
Yep.
And this was the Will Fuller moment where we go 8 plays, 80 yards, minute 42 left. And everyone forgets, like, we were fringe field goal range, and that was with 12 seconds left. Like, it was kind of like we're taking one deep shot, and other than that, we're running it 5 yards to try to set up like a Justin Yoon long field goal. And Kaiser, there was actually a pre-snap, like they got the audible wrong, and so Fuller didn't even start on the snap. Like Kaiser takes the ball, and if you watch, like Fuller just doesn't start running for a good like 2 seconds because he's still looking over at the sidelines. And then it's like, oh, I'm supposed to go, and just burns by the secondary. And then there's obviously the very famous meme where like the UVA student is like hunched over the like edge of his seat, just looking very beat. And so Notre Dame wins it on a near walk-off. I think there's still, I don't know, 10 seconds left or so.
Yeah.
But go on to win that one. That was just like one of the most electric kind of game-ending plays I've ever seen, but particularly for a road game, that was a fun one.
Yeah, I mean, even watching it on TV, that's one of my most memorable memories as a fan. I was watching that. I was living in New York at the time. I was watching at the Notre Dame bar in New York called Public House, which I think actually shut down now, unfortunately. But I remember watching it. There was packed Notre Dame crowd. I was watching it there with actually one of my coworkers who was a Notre Dame fan, and we definitely were fully assumed that we were going to lose that game. And then it was basically grabbing victory out of nowhere. And I remember when they showed that UVA fan just kind of, draped over, looking totally defeated. I remember seeing that. I was like, wow, okay, that's one heck of an image. And sure enough, I still see that image pop up on social media all the time as a meme.
What would you say is the most electric environment you've been in? Is it Georgia?
It's got to be, yeah. I mean, I would
Yeah.
say Georgia. I mean, the thing is like the BCS National Title Week, like the energy for the whole week, like
Yeah.
for everyone there, like over a sustained period of time. I think even if we're a legit national title contender, I can't even imagine that we're going to be able to match that energy again. Because at that time, I mean, Notre Dame had been like, we were really climbing out of the Charlie Weiss eras. We'd been bad for like, or not, maybe not bad, but we really hadn't been relevant to that point for a long period of time. In the last 15 years, like we've made the BCS national title game. We've made the playoff a few times. And yeah, sure, we haven't been at Alabama's level, but we've been a lot closer than we were, I think, than it had been in a while when we were in 2012. So I know it's just hard for me to imagine that we ever hit that level of energy again.
Mm-hmm.
But for one single game, it would have to be UGA, and it was a good
Yeah.
game too. I mean, it was close the entire time. Georgia fans definitely. I mean, you could even just feel the energy in the stadium. They legitimately thought that they could lose that game. It wasn't like they were like, oh yeah, like we knew we were going to have that one.
Yeah.
Like I was sitting next to a
close the whole way.
I had Georgia fans all around me, and they were like, oh, you guys are like, they're like, okay, yeah, you guys are a little bit better than we thought. Like you could see the stress on them for sure.
Yeah, and that's out, before they started their run of national titles as well. So they weren't quite the juggernaut they are today. For me, so I've been to 3 that would go in the category. The one though that and I'm incredibly biased saying this, that I just thought was meh was Michigan. I just didn't think the big house was that loud. We lost. Devin Gardner had a great game. It was a shitty game from our perspective, but I just wasn't that wowed. The tailgate scene is really interesting. So much of it is based around the fraternities and sororities, but it's such a more of a party culture that like the frat house we were at actually like ran out of beer and they just all like kept partying. And I was just like, yeah, but I want another beer. And
But I
so
would never.
we
Yeah,
just like left and they just all like kept dancing and like weren't drinking. We were just like, what are we like doing? And it was so like
yeah,
that was just very different. But the stadium, I just didn't think it was that electric. I thought Georgia was electric. The one that really topped it, I'll tip my hat. Ohio State was nuts. Like that place was ruckus from the start. No one sat down, and it was like actually same guy that I mentioned earlier, Mike. His wife Morgan went to UVA. That was that connection. He went to Ohio State. This is my sister-in-law's brother, so kind of my brother-in-law. And he went to Ohio State, and we went with him. The one downside, you're always gonna have bad fans, but twice we were sitting with Ohio State fans, and I had the end seat. People would be like coming up and down the rows, and they like spit on us. And then like we had to rearrange where like I wasn't sitting in the aisle because I was wearing Notre Dame gear. Like that was wild and bizarre.
yeah,
And I don't think that's a reflection on all of Ohio State. I get it. Bad fans can be anywhere. But I'll tip my hat. Like I couldn't hear Mike sitting next to me. Like I just like it was hard to even like lean over and be like, wow, that was a great play. And you'd be like, what? Like I can't hear you. It was just nuts the whole time. So I'll tip my hat. I thought that was one of the loudest I've ever been in. Mike, maybe last question. What was the worst one? What was the one you just really wish you didn't go to that game?
yeah. So fortunately, I've never had anyone spit on me. That's pretty bad. I mean, honestly, that's a very bad.
It's like a
representation.
Keith Hernandez out of Seinfeld moment where it was like, did
Yeah,
that just happen? Like,
yeah,
do we have a witness? And it was like,
yeah.
it was just bizarre.
Well, I mean, every fan base has those fans. Even Notre Dame, every single fan base that's of any meaningful size or passion is going to have fans like that. I have one of my really good friends. He went to the big house and he told me people were chucking beers at him. I think that was after the Gary Gray game or something like that. This was back when we were students, but this stuff happens all the time. I do have one comment about your experience at Michigan with the frat houses. I was going to say that would running out of beer, that would absolutely never happen in Baton Rouge. That is like a mortal sin down in Louisiana.
And it would never happen in South Bend.
Yeah, it would never happen in South Bend. Like we're Catholics, man. We care about our drinking. It's a core tenet. Don't tell that to any priest I've ever interacted with. But there is one that kind of stands out, but it's for just a number of various factors. So for me, it's 2016 USC. And I didn't have. It's not like the fans were like mean to me or people were being jerks or the stadium or the crowd like sucked or anything. It was more that it was Southern California. Typically, you expect really nice weather, like 75 degrees. And I had a bunch of family visiting. I had a bunch of friends visiting, and the weather was awful. It was like 50 degrees, which doesn't sound bad, but if you're living in 50 degrees in Southern California is like negative 10 degrees in like Chicago. It's just like, if you're not expecting it, it's extremely uncomfortable. And then it was raining really aggressively too. So no one was prepared for that at all. So we're sitting in the stadium, just freezing, shivering. And then Notre Dame got absolutely walloped by Sam Darnold. I think we lost 45-27. This was kind of at the peak of the. I don't even. It was Brian Vigora. I can't even remember if he was still the coach at this time.
He might have gotten let go, but it was that year.
Fired. Yeah. He had his fingerprints on the defense, though. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
But yeah, just like not just a miserable game. I think pretty much everyone I knew didn't even stay the entire game just because it was so uncomfortable watching it. Really, the only positive takeaway from this experience was that our buddy Brandon, I think he had asked his future father-in-law permission to marry his now wife. Yeah, so I think that was like the one positive thing that happened. And I mean, I don't know. It's interesting. Just I feel like at USC, most of the games I've been to here, Notre Dame just has not been great. 2022, Caleb Williams. I was at that game. He just completely destroyed us. I got some light heckling from USC fans, but honestly, it was kind of all in good fun. It wasn't like anyone spitting on me or anything like that. But it's not like, look, I think like the campus, like the USC campus is nice. Like the stadium is right by there. So it's definitely not like a bad game day atmosphere. The tailgating is cool. It's just like, for whatever reason, I just have not had any luck with USC. Going again this fall. Hopefully we get good weather. Hopefully we get Notre Dame win. I think it has the potential to be a fun road atmosphere if, a few things go my way.
So one of my criteria of what I've noticed over time for fun college football environments is when the stadiums are on campus. Like I've been to games at Bobby Dodd, at Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, their stadium, Michigan State. all pretty good environments, like just because they're on a college campus. And when I say environments, I don't even just mean loud and ruckus, but I just mean like there's a lot of students, there's a lot of pageantry, everything else. An example of one where it's not on campus, or I guess two, where it's just kind of weird and awkward, is Pittsburgh playing at Heinz Field, which is not on the University of Pittsburgh's campus, or Maryland plays a lot of their games. I think they have a stadium on campus, but for bigger games, they'll go and play where the Washington Commanders go. And my college roommate, Drew, is from Maryland, so we drove out there and went to the game with his family. I guess was that sophomore, junior year. And I just remember, like, you're kind of in the middle of nowhere. I'm like, is there even a band? Are there students? Are there, like, it's just like, it's just not like a great environment. One that is similar to that, and then was just the perfect storm. So I'm going to talk about the shirt I'm wearing, NC State, the Hurricane game. It's 3 miles away from NC State's campus. So like, it's not actually at NC State in Raleigh. It's kind of just, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes away, but just makes for like weird shuttling back and forth and everything else. And then we're obviously in the middle of a hurricane. Every other game in the 5-state area has been postponed, and we still play, and it sucked. It was like 10-3. We had more fumbles than first downs. We had more missed field goals than, like, I think plays. It was just like the whole thing was terrible. It was the, like, Brian Kelly went off on Sam Mustipher and the offensive line and why they couldn't block, and we were trying to pass the ball. It just, the thing stunk. There was a delay for the weather, and I think by the end of the game, we were one of like 100 fans left in the stadium. Like, it was miserable. And I just remember sitting there, and Ann and I were like, we've made it this far. We're just going to make it to say we were one of the 100 idiots to stay. And then we try to get home, and there's trees falling down. Like, we're literally in the middle of a hurricane. So a bunch of the roads were closed. So it was like an hour to get back to the friend's apartment we were staying at. That was like, by far, what was the one game I was just like, I wish someone else just had my ticket that day. For sure would have been the Hurricane game.
Yeah.
Just perfect storm of bad football, bad weather. You're out in the middle of nowhere. I have the shirt to remember it. Other than that, really wish I didn't remember that one.
That sounds similar to my USC experience in 2016. Obviously not a hurricane, but yeah, 50 and rainy in LA is not great. Obviously trees weren't flying everywhere. It's interesting, Brett, you mentioned kind of stadiums that are not really linked to the campus. One for me that I went to, and this was when Temple was actually pretty good in 2015. They were ranked that year. And so I went to the link, watched them in Philly. I had a good time in Philly. Philly's a fun city, but I didn't really get any sort of vibe for kind of the campus experience for Temple. I just felt like I was watching a game at the link, basically. Although I will say, like, I did get the full Philly experience, and then a couple rows in front of me, there were just a couple guys who just got in a fight for like no reason, basically. This was the first game I went to with my now wife. She's like, "What the heck is going on?" I'm like, "This is just." I was like, "Don't worry about it. We're in Philly. This is just kind of what happens when you go to sporting events."
That's cool.
Yeah. So.
And I feel like if they're cool places, like, I've never been to Yankee Stadium or when we played at Fenway, but I was at the Arizona State game at Jerry World. Like, I just feel like when they're really cool, kind of don't get to play there very often, and more like true neutral site games, that can be very fun and like experiential. I think when it's the, like, this is kind of your home stadium or your like alternate home stadium, but it's also like not connected to the campus pageantry and everything else that comes with college football. It's kind of just a knock in my grading system.
For sure, dude. And like USC, I mentioned USC, bad experience, but like it doesn't really have anything to do with USC. It's just the weather sucked. We played bad. Like, they actually have a lot of pageantry. The stadium's right by the campus. The tailgating's pretty cool. So yeah, I mean, that's just one where, like I said, hopefully I'll have a better road experience. And a better road experience for me is actually a bad home experience for USC fans.
Exactly. Well, hopefully all the Notre Dame fans that made the trip to West Lafayette this weekend, they'll be talking about this one for a long time. A 66-7 dismantling of the Purdue Boilermakers. Now on to the next one. Until we talk again, Gyrish beat Redhawks.
Gyrish beat Redhawks.